I caught my wife getting really close with her best friend's ex-boyfriend. I think she might have cheated on me with him. Hi everyone, I heard it's very helpful to be here and I hope so. I think something from my wife's past has come back to haunt me. I want to talk about it with strangers, because even though I think my wife having a physical affair, there's still a chance I'm overreacting. With everything going on, it looks like my wife's been unfaithful. Me, M31, and my wife, F30, live in Detroit and have a great marriage. About 11 years ago I was visiting my wife at her parents' house and her best friend got in my face and asked me why I didn't put a ring on my wife's finger yet, while her best friend, we'll just go and call her, Mandy, was grilling me. My wife wasn't stopping her, so I got the point pretty quick. Since I cared about her so much, I was happy they felt that way. After that I started to make moves to one day marry her. 2 years after that we got married and we now have 2 beautiful daughters. Getting married was one of my happiest days, and I had always planned one day to be a good husband and father. My wife wanted a pretty big wedding and a lot of people attended. We even got some of our relatives from Puerto Rico to attend. Me and my wife wasn't rich, but we were good providers and our kids were always good. My wife was always a great person. She's smart, fun, and she has a great sense of humor which you don't expect from gorgeous women like her. She was a good mom and our daughters who are 7 and 4 years old love and respect her. Our oldest even acts like her. This is something I would always tell her. And she was gorgeous. I loved her pretty smile, her brown eyes and especially her amazing ass. She was the type of girl who struggled a little to put some jeans on, and whether it was in a sexy dress or some tights, it was visible on her slim figure. She always loved how she looked and it caused my mom to believe she had an ego. She might be right, but I never really minded. I work in a renovation project facility, and my wife owns her own nail salon. This never surprised me because she always was a fashionista, which she disagreed about. My wife was always up on the latest trends and had to have everything new, whether it was the new iPhone, new heels, name brand clothes, she had to have it. This made roll my eyes, but it was her money so I couldn't say anything, until she became a parent and it made her have to cut back. Instead of keeping up with the glamour girl life, now she focuses on our daughters more. She's now used to the last year model iPhone and cut back on designer clothes for Disney characters our daughters love wearing. The only time she wears her good clothes is on holidays or vacations. Even though that's the case, I had to splurge less as well. It don't matter because our kids are more important and my family is my priority. Everything seemed okay, but now I'm seeing problems after me and my wife ran into her old friend's ex. Me and our family was at the supermarket buying some groceries. Our oldest reminded about her Pop-Tarts and my wife told me to with her to get her favorite ones. After finally making her decision on a new flavor, we came back out the aisle to see my wife laughing and talking to some guy. When my daughter interrupted them with the Pop-Tarts, my wife introduced me to him. She said this guy apparently was the ex-boyfriend of her old friend. Let's just call her Tasha. At first I couldn't remember who Tasha was. Then I remembered she used to work with Tasha at some old job before my wife had started up her own business. This guy, we'll call him Trey, seemed happy to see us and was friendly to us, so I didn't mind at first. Trey and my wife caught up a little bit more and it was awkward to see her smiling all in his face and seemed a little too happy to see him again. After waiting patiently, I signaled it was time to cook dinner and Trey laughed, saying it was good to see us. On the ride home my wife told me how surprised she was to see him at the supermarket. She said she was more surprised that Tasha and Trey had broke up. I asked how long it was that she spoke to Tasha and she said about 4 years. After hearing that I had thought to myself that they definitely lost touch. At first I thought that would be the last that I had heard about Trey, but as time went by I noticed that Trey and my wife kept in touch. They would talk on the phone and also on her social media. He would mention me every once in a while. So I thought nothing about it because I felt included. They started talking more frequent and the conversations got longer, even up to after hours. But I started getting suspicious when Super Bowl Sunday came around. On the day of the Super Bowl, my wife was talking to Trey on the phone when I asked her a question. After answering me, a little while later she came to me and said Trey wanted to talk to me. Surprised, I took the phone and asked him what's up. He asked me was I going to watch the Super Bowl and I told him I planned to. When he asked me who I was going for and said sarcastically the Lions. Laughing, he said he was too, and offered to watch the game with me. I told him that would be great, but we were going to have a bunch of kids over and I doubted he would want to deal with that. Laughing, he said never mind, and I passed the phone back to my wife. I thought that was the end of it, but couple hours later my wife came back and said Trey wanted to talk to me again. He said if I could get away there was a Super Bowl party a friend of his was having and I could go and watch it with them. My wife told me she would call her brother and tell him to pick up his kids earlier and we could go a little late, and I decided to go. After her came and got his kids, me and my wife got ready to go and got there around the halftime show. While talking to everybody I understood that the party was being thrown because somebody was a die-hard Cincinnati Bengals fan. The person who threw the party argued with who would win and wanted the Bengals to lose. He definitely got his wish and the Bengals lost to the Rams and it stopped the guy from being a loudmouth. After having a good laugh at this guy's expense, we all just enjoyed the get-together. It was at this point where I started to get suspicious because of how my wife was interacting with Trey. I didn't like how she was all in his face and I felt left out in the conversations. I thought it was because I wasn't being social enough and put myself in the conversations more. At some point I asked him about why him and Tasha broke up. Trey said he and Tasha was just casually dating, they weren't really serious back then. My wife laughed and said she was surprised because Tasha really liked him. After a while, said I had to go and get another Smirnoff and walked in the porch where the cooler was. After I was mingling with some people on porch, I went back in the house. Going back in the house I was looking for my wife and saw them talking in a corner. I was about to walk over to them, but I felt a weird vibe about how they was talking. He was a little too close to her and was acting all predatory with her. I paused and stayed out of sight to see what was going on. He held my wife's hand and she was giggling all shy. After that she walked into the kitchen and he followed her while looking at her ass. All I could say was what the fuck, but then I moved a little closer to get a good look in the kitchen. Standing by the sink my wife was talking to some girl and her back was turned away from Trey. While talking to my wife the girl looked at Trey and could see that he was looking at her. I think she told my wife, and my wife looked back and smiled at him. Turning back to the girl she continued their conversation knowing that Trey was looking at her ass. Usually I love the way my wife dresses, but now I was feeling very paranoid. My wife would talk to the girl then look back and smile at Trey as he continued to take glances at my wife's ass in her yoga pants. And my wife wouldn't budge, she would just look at him like she was saying, I know you want to do me. Even though they would try to play it off they will go back to looking at each other and you would notice if you were paying attention. All I could think was I hope I'm not seeing what I think that I'm seeing. After the girl said something to my wife she followed her back into the living room and she ended up seeing me. She asked me what the guys on the porch was talking about and I told her nothing much, and that I was ready to go. She said she wanted to stay longer but I reminded her that her brother was still with our kids waiting on us so he could leave. After we said goodbye to Trey and everybody, we went back home especially since we both had to work tomorrow. Riding back, I had to tell her what I saw. In the car I told her it looked like Trey was trying to hit on her and she acted like I was crazy. She laughed it off and said I was wrong. I left it alone, but I wanted to start paying more attention to them after what I saw. He was definitely looking at her ass. The more I paid attention, the more suspicious I had noticed she was acting. She always had her phone, she always brought up Trey to me and to her best friend Mandy, then she started handcuffing her phone, talking all the way to early in the morning. One night I asked her was she still talking to Trey, she just shot me a look and said she was. After that, she hung up the phone after about 5 minutes. After a while, I got tired of her talking so late and asked her to talk in the daytime with him and her excuse was she talks to Mandy then. And when I told her it was real inappropriate to talk to Trey so late at night she'd laugh and say I'm acting paranoid. Everything I'd try and say she would dismiss it and say I'm worried about nothing. All my questions did make her stop bringing up Trey however. I guess she thought it would stop me from getting all upset but it didn't. 2 days ago made me believe the worst. On my wife's off day she said she was going over her friend Mandy's house to do her mom's nails. Since I knew about this a couple days ago I really wasn't suspicious. Later on that night my youngest daughter asked me if we could eat pizza but I told her that her mom was cooking dinner. She made a big fuss about it and since I was in the mood for pizza as well, decided to call my wife and tell her she didn't have to cook anything. When I called my wife it went straight to voicemail. I tried again and the same thing happened. I had to ask myself why the hell was her phone off and that this never happened before. I let half an hour pass and her phone still went to voicemail. After that I decided to call Mandy. When I called Mandy she actually picked up. I asked her was my wife there and she said she left. I said I thought she was going to do Mandy a favor and do her mother's nails for her, but she said she got a phone call and just left. I asked her who called and she said she don't know, but she was mad that my wife told Mandy to tell her mother to come by her nail salon tomorrow. This surprised me because Mandy was like a real sister to her, and to hear that this happened was just FD up. After hanging up with her, I called around and nobody called my wife, so to me this left only Trey. I got so angry I couldn't believe this was happening. At the Super Bowl party, Trey told us where he stayed, but I didn't know the address, only the street. If my wife was there I knew he was doing her. After grabbing my keys, I was just about to walk out the door when I remembered my kids were still in their room playing. Grabbing my phone, I called my mom to see if she could babysit for a while, but she didn't pick up the phone. My best friend, let's call him Marcus, was my last option, so I called him up. When he picked up, I asked him what he was doing and he said his girl was cooking dinner. I told him I was about to ask him for a favor and he asked me what it was. I told him never mind, it was too big of a favor. But he asked me again, so I told him I think my wife was cheating on me. After telling Marcus this, he went silent like it was the last thing he'd think I'd say. He asked me was I serious, and I told him everything. He said that he couldn't come and watch the kids, but I could bring the kids to him. This pissed me off, because he lived on the other side of town. After getting the kids ready to leave, it took about 30 minutes to get there. After getting to Marcus, he asked me did I know where Trey lived. I told him the street and he looked at me like I was crazy. The street Trey lived on was a long avenue, and he asked me was I really going to drive all the way down the street to find them, and I said yeah. When I was about to leave, he stopped me and told me to go in his car. He said if I'm wrong and they see my car, my wife could call me a crazy husband and at least they won't recognize his car right off. After handing me the keys, he told me don't do anything crazy in his car. He asked did I want him to come with me, and I said no. It's already FD up, he's involved. He took the kids, and I made my way to try to find my wife. Hopefully I wasn't too late and I could bust her in the act, but I hoped I was really wrong about this, but my instincts as a man still bother me. After a long ride I made it down the street Trey lives on. Slowing down I tried to look for my wife's silver Kia. It was a terrible neighborhood, but at this point I couldn't care less. All the suspicious BS my wife was doing led me to this. I was really hoping I couldn't find her car here, but eventually I did. Not only did I see her car, but I saw her and Trey as well. She was wearing a pink sweatsuit and Trey had on nothing but a white beater, some shorts and some flip-flops. She looked like she was getting ready to leave and I couldn't believe what I saw. I mean, the guy had practically no clothes on, and I didn't like how he was again too close to her. Driving past, I threw a fit in the car. I kept saying, he fucked her, I know he fucked her. I didn't have any other explanation except he was doing my wife, and I bet magically her phone works now. Not only did I catch her all hugged up with this guy, now I had to try and beat her home. When I got home, I was surprised to see that me and the kids beat her home with time to spare. After putting the kids to bed, I decided to wait up for my wife to come in. Almost 40 minutes later, she came in the door and she was acting unhappy to come back. Looking over at me, she walked right past me and went in the bedroom. Her not saying anything really blew my mind. I walked in our bedroom immediately and asked why her phone was turned off, and she told me that she had never turned it off. She said her phone died and she had to charge it up. I asked her where she was and she said she already told she was over Mandy's house. I told her Mandy said she left, and she brushed it off like she was irritated. She said that don't mean she wasn't there, and it just blew me away that I was going through this right now. I asked her did she leave Mandy to be with Trey, and she hesitated for a minute before saying yeah. I asked, she didn't say anything and she told me it didn't matter. She said she's tired of me having a problem with Trey and she just wanted to leave this alone because she was tired. She asked me did the kids eat and I told her we went out to eat. Not even asking questions, she went back in the living room to watch TV and be on her phone. After that night she not the same wife that I knew. Now she don't talk to me, she always texting on her phone in the dining room, and she always look at me like she wants to get away from me but she can't. This is BS because she's acting like I did something to her when all I do is cater to her, and whose battery dies in the middle of the day? I really don't know what to do, and I need to make a decision on my gut feelings. I don't know for if she cheated, but her behavior has been a bunch of red flags. I hope I'm overreacting, but the signs are there, especially at the Super Bowl party. They've been talking all day. He's been looking at her ass at a party and she allowed it, and now she's meeting up at his house secretly. He has to be doing her. I will try an update once I find something solid, but I really need to know if I'm overreacting. Update: I want to thank everybody for their support and honestly helping me. People here has been guiding me through this and it's been helpful. I was going to post this weekend, but so much has happened that I had to post this update today. This is definitely a crazy time for me, and it's blowing me away right now how right you are about my wife. At the beginning of this year, when my wife ran into her friend, Tasha, ex-boyfriend at the supermarket, when my wife introduced me to this guy, Trey, I didn't think it was a big deal. At first it seemed like she had reunited with an old friend or whatever, but she seemed a little too excited to see him again. After that they kept in touch and it was beginning to be too much. She started showing all the red flags and it was looking real suspicious. They'd talk on the phone for hours, they would like each other pics on Facebook, and this guy started calling late at night. When I told her all this looked inappropriate, she said I was overreacting. When she spoke with him, she would laugh and giggle, and she would try to teach him Spanish words since we're Puerto Rican. What was worst was at the Super Bowl party Trey had invited us to. At the party I caught him checking out my wife, especially her ass. She had the type of ass where if she walked past, you would wait a few seconds then turn and look at it. Eventually she became aware of this even caught him and didn't do or say anything about it. When I told her he was checking her out, she dismissed that too. It got to the point where I had to try and find her last week because she wasn't where she claimed she was. She was supposed to go over her best friend, Mandy, house to Mandy's mom's nails but flaked on her after Trey called her. Since my wife's phone went straight to voicemail, I assumed she was with Trey and I had to call my best friend, Marcus, and he let me borrow his car to find her. Driving down Trey Street, found them and it bothered me that he practically had no clothes on. He had on just a white beater, some shorts, and it looked like flip-flops. Driving back to Marcus' house, he asked me what I saw. I told him and even he admitted to he thinks he fucked her. I told him I think so too, especially since he had no clothes on. If I was dressed that way and somebody came over, my wife would tell me to put some clothes on. He looked like he just woke up or something. He asked me what I planned on doing but I didn't really know at the time. After that, I had thanked Marcus for babysitting my kids and surprisingly made it home almost 40 minutes before my wife did. When she came back she even looked guilty. When I asked where she was super vague and wouldn't answer me in a direct way. Eventually I just had to drop it, especially since I didn't catch them in the act like I planned to. People here said it was going to get worse and it did. Now she looks at me like I'm her prison guard and don't really want to talk to me. She only talked to her friends on her phone and don't interact with the kids and treat them like they're a chore. She just sits in our little dining room area and text. I didn't even know what to say to her. What was even worse was thanks to my schedule, I couldn't really stop her from cheating. My wife knew my everyday routine and I'm sure Trey did too. Between my job, taking care, or our kids, and obligations to my mom, they apparently met up while I was out. I know this because while I was out, I would try to call her and she never answered. My wife's schedule was more flexible than mine, especially since my wife was her own boss thanks to her nail salon. Whenever I got back home my wife wouldn't be there, especially if she didn't have to pick up the kids from school, and when she came back she'd be vague about where she was. This really messed with my mind and gave me what I think is anxiety. I would be with my mom and I would be thinking of my wife riding some guy's meat. And this was ever since she left Trey's house that night. If it wasn't for this community, I wouldn't have been a lot worse. If I was blindsided by this I don't know what my mindset would have been, but after I was told to calm down and start monitoring them for truth I had to man up. After doing just that, I was able to get the truth and found out today that yes, Trey was fucking my wife, and my plan it worked out perfectly. That weekend after work, I bought a VAR and put it in her car. At first I tested it out when I took the kids to eat McDonald's and it works pretty good. After that I put it in my wife's car. Since it's possible he banged her in the car it should pick it up. It should even pick up any talk or incriminating conversations they could be having. Doing this I did feel crazy and couldn't believe this was my life. The most important advice I think I got was to act like I wasn't concerned about Trey. It was a lie, but I think I need to start getting used to it. Not bringing him up and acting like everything was good got her to ease up a little. It was hard, but I just kept my mind on getting the truth. When I told Marcus about this, even he thought I was a genius. A few days ago I snuck out and got the VAR out of her car and listened to what was on it. I heard a few things but I definitely heard her talking with Trey in her car. The one thing that stood out was when they were riding somewhere, the music was on, but it could still kinda make out what they were saying. He was definitely flirting with my wife and calling her sexy. My wife was giggling and I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it wasn't stopping him. I heard him tell her to stop somewhere and things got silent for a minute. Then it sounded like a bunch of guys got in the car and they drove off. It got harder to hear them with everybody holding their own conversations. It sounded like she was driving them around to places. Through all their nonsense I heard him say he was trying to come over. For a second I couldn't hear the conversation, but I definitely heard my wife say to Trey she has to leave early, so come over. That was pretty much the end of the usefulness coming from the VAR in her car. They just talked and laughed and one guy called Trey thirsty. After that I tried to figure out who was my wife talking about when she said somebody was leaving early. I thought it might be Mandy, but even though Mandy was like a sister to her, it don't seem like she told Mandy about Trey. She definitely wasn't talking about her mom. So it had to be the girl who run the salon with my wife. It didn't make too much sense to me because there was a teenager learning to do nails there, but it was the best thing to go on. Nobody else made sense. I called up my friend Marcus to see if we could swap cars for the day and he said yeah. After telling him what I heard, he was shocked, called her a high price hoe, and said he hoped I catch her this time, already knowing how I move. She knew to leave after me and my mom's next door neighbors helped her with her yard. Since I couldn't cancel on my mom, I told I'd only stay for a little while because I was tired from work. My mom blew down on me for leaving early, but then her next door neighbor said he could handle it. Around 9, I pulled up to my wife's shop when it was closing. It's located in a strip mall, so it was possible to hide with the other cars there, especially since it was Marcus' car I drove. Inside, Trey was definitely there and I was pissed to know I was right. Nobody was left inside except my wife Trey, and let's call her Sherry. My wife was definitely dressed to impress and Trey was all over her. I saw Trey was behind my wife with his arms wrapped around her while they were talking. After about 20 minutes they really started to get into it and Trey was kissing on my wife's neck and grabbing her on her behind. After trapping her against the wall it was clear it was kissing and Sherry just watched them. After about 5 minutes Sherry must have said something about leaving and they smiled and waved her off. Taking Trey's hand they walked off to the back where it looked like they were going down into the basement area. I'd been down in the basement area when she first started up the salon, so I knew that was the only thing in the back. She was looking for a bigger place to run her shop so she could have an office space, since the place she's at now wasn't really high-end looking enough for her. If she doesn't know anything, she knows how to market something. I was so pissed off I can't lie. I really can't believe this woman would do this to me. I did so much for her and she would do this to me. And Trey was definitely a real snake. He never gave me good vibes about him and I now see why. After I grabbed my VAR, I made my way over to the salon. Sherry had just got done grabbing her things, so I waited for her to come out before I made my presence known. When I called out to her she looked like she saw a ghost in front of her. I told her not lock the doors, and that I know everything. She claimed she didn't know what I was talking about and I said I watched them the whole time. I called her a fat, lying bitch and we got into a huge argument. She said don't blame her that my wife was fucking another man and I called her messy and to get out of my way. She said I wasn't going to be able to catch them fucking because the door was locked. I had asked her why would they lock the door if Sherry knew they were fucking already, and she said they didn't want anybody coming down. Making my way in, pulled out my phone and called my wife. Apparently Sherry decided to follow me in while I had made my way to the back. My wife didn't answer my call so I surprised her by banging on the basement door since it actually was locked. I didn't know what was going on down there, but I knew if she didn't come up we were over. After banging on the door 3 times telling them to come up, they still didn't come from the basement. Turning back to Sherry, I asked her how long she knew about this. Sherry swore she knew about Trey for about a month, and that my wife started cheating with him recently. She said he came in on her break and after a while they had went down in the basement. She said the next day they would talk about what happened. I asked her did she know that was Tasha's ex-boyfriend and she said my wife told her. I told Sherry we had kids and she said she don't have anything to do with that. I said that's fine, and that I'll be using what she said in court. When Sherry asked me what I was talking about I showed her the VAR and told her she can go home now. Getting back in the car, I drove back to Marcus, who was a big help with not just the car, but watching kid too. I told him what I saw and he and his girlfriend consoled me. After that, while me and Marcus was talking, Mandy had called my phone. This was the last thing I needed, but I should have expected it. I decided to pick up and she said my wife told her everything and that my wife wanted to talk to me tomorrow. I told her to put her on the phone now, but Mandy said she won't let me talk to her now and she knew I was going to blow up on her. I told her I wanted to speak to my wife but Mandy wouldn't put her on. Mandy said if I came over she'd call the police and wait until tomorrow. She said she was going to make my wife call me and they both wanted me to calm down. I said yeah, whatever, and just hung up. After coming back home with the kids I got super emotional. Not only that, my anxiety started kicking in again. I still can't believe this is happening to me. Even after I did everything right with this woman, somehow I did it wrong. I thought after being married for this long, I was sure I didn't have to worry about this happening. The worst is that this wasn't a one-time thing, he was fucking her consistently. Now my whole world is going to have to change because whatever reason. I can't wait to see what she has to say tomorrow. I will update when I hear what she has to say. The ball is in her court and if I don't like way I hear I'm getting us a divorce, my mind is racing and I think it may have been a bad idea to leave Marcus' house. I feel alone, but I had to post here since everybody wanted to know exactly what my wife was doing.